The old Whitmore House had always been a source of curiosity for the townspeople. Perched on a hill overlooking the valley, its peeling paint and sagging roof made it seem as if time itself had abandoned it. For decades, it remained empty, except for the occasional rumors of lights flickering in the windows at night, shadows moving against the walls, and strange sounds that made the bravest of neighbors avoid it. Nobody dared to enter, except for the occasional thrill-seeker, who inevitably returned with wild stories, or didn't return at all. When Claire and her friends, Megan, David, and Sam, heard these tales during their first week at college, they dismissed them as mere legend, an exaggerated story to scare kids. But when they learned that the house had just gone up for sale, curiosity overcame caution. It was a gray, overcast evening when they drove up the winding road to the Whitmore House. Rain-slicked streets reflected the dull orange of the streetlights, and the wind whispered against the car windows like voices speaking in a language they almost recognized. Claire had insisted they go inside, joking that they could prove whether the stories were real. As they stepped out, the air felt unnaturally cold, a stark contrast to the mild fall day. The front door, surprisingly intact despite years of neglect, creaked ominously as David pushed it open. Dust swirled in the weak light of their flashlights, and the smell of decay, old wood, mildew, and something faintly metallic hit them immediately. The house felt alive, not in the sense of warmth or welcome, but in a sense of awareness, as though it were studying them. They explored the first floor carefully, moving from room to room. The furniture was covered in thick sheets, but underneath, the outlines of decayed armchairs and warped tables were visible. Cobwebs hung like fragile curtains in every corner, and the old grandfather clock in the hallway ticked loudly, its pendulum swinging unevenly. At first, the friends laughed nervously at the creaks and groans, attributing them to the house settling. But as they approached the staircase, the laughter faltered. A soft, almost imperceptible whisper floated down from the upper floor, carrying a tone of warning. Or was it an invitation? Leave. Now, it seemed to say. The friends froze, staring at one another. Sam scoffed and muttered something about drafts, but the unease was already settling into their bones. They ascended the staircase slowly, each step groaning under their weight. The hallway above was lined with doors, each one slightly ajar. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and then abruptly stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the voices, pressing down on their ears and hearts. Claire suggested splitting up to cover more ground. Reluctantly, they agreed, and each took a room. Claire chose the last door at the end of the hall, drawn by a strange, unexplainable pull. Inside, the room was a child's nursery, untouched for decades. The crib was intact, though its paint had chipped to reveal the splintered wood beneath. A rocking chair faced the window, slowly swaying back and forth as if someone had just been sitting in it. Claire's flashlight flickered as she stepped closer, and she noticed faint scratches along the wall, almost like claw marks. A chill ran down her spine, and she realized she wasn't alone. She turned, and for a brief second, she saw a figure standing in the doorway, tall, thin, featureless, like a shadow draped over human form. She blinked, and it was gone. Her heartbeat thudded painfully in her ears, and she ran to the hall, desperate to reach her friends. Meanwhile, Megan was in what had once been the dining room, now filled with overturned chairs and broken dishes. The air around her shimmered, and she could hear faint giggles echoing from the corners. "David?" she called out, but only the wind answered. The giggling turned into muffled cries, as if the room itself was filled with trapped children. Panic set in, and she felt invisible fingers brush her arm. Spinning around, she saw nothing but the empty room, yet she knew she was being watched. David had gone to the study, a room lined with bookshelves. He felt compelled to open a particular drawer in the old desk, and inside he found letters and journals, yellowed with age. They belonged to the Whitmore family, detailing strange occurrences in the house, furniture moving on its own, whispers at night, and shadows that followed family members around. One entry made his blood run cold. The house hungers. It takes what it wants. We are only guests in its eyes. He glanced around nervously, feeling the oppressive weight of unseen eyes pressing on him, and he realized he had to leave. But when he tried to retrace his steps, the door slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls, and he was plunged into darkness. Sam had wandered into the attic, a space filled with old trunks and decaying furniture. The air was thicker here, almost suffocating, and he stumbled over a loose floorboard. A cold hand seemed to grab his ankle, yanking him to the ground. The shadows around him coalesced, forming figures, twisted, hollow-eyed silhouettes that whispered his name in unison. Terrified, he scrambled to his feet and ran down the narrow attic stairs, the whispers following him, repeating over and over, "Stay, stay." By now, all four were panicked, calling out to one another, but unable to locate each other in the oppressive darkness. The house seemed to pulse, as if breathing, walls contracting and expanding, hallways stretching impossibly long. Claire, still near the nursery, heard her name whispered, this time from inside the crib. She leaned in, and a tiny hand shot out, gripping hers with unnatural strength. She screamed and pulled back, but the hand clung, icy and unyielding. The crib shook violently, and the rocking chair spun faster, crashing into the wall with a deafening bang. Claire stumbled backward into the hallway, where she finally saw her friends, Megan, David, and Sam, running toward her. Relief was short-lived as the house seemed to react to their gathering. Doors slammed, the floorboards groaned, and a suffocating darkness seeped from the corners, thickening the air. Desperate, they bolted for the front door, but the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly. Every turn revealed more shadows, more whispers, and more figures lurking just beyond the reach of their flashlights. One by one, the shadows emerged, their forms more grotesque and human-like, yet distorted in ways that made their hearts seize with terror. The figures advanced silently, gliding over the floor, their eyes hollow pits of darkness. Claire and her friends ran, tripping over debris, hearts pounding, lungs burning. The house seemed alive, moving against them, twisting hallways and shifting staircases to trap them inside. Finally, they reached the front door, and with a combined effort, threw it open and spilled into the cold night air. They collapsed on the damp grass, panting and trembling, and dared to look back. The Whitmore house stood silent once more, but for the faint flicker of lights in the windows, as though it were observing them, waiting for the next visitors brave or foolish enough to enter. No one in the town saw them return for days. When they finally spoke, their voices were shaky and full of terror. They described horrors that no one believed, but they all carried the same detail. Shadows that moved, whispers that spoke in impossible tongues, and a house that was alive and hungry. From that day on, the Whitmore house was left entirely alone, the legend growing more horrifying with each telling. And those who knew of it swore that if you listen closely on stormy nights, you can still hear the whispers of the 4 college students trapped, somewhere deep within, calling for help that would never come. The house waits, always.